Welcome back to Beyond Well. I'm Sheila Hamilton, and we're talking with Bob Drake today, a clinician, a teacher, a mental health service researcher, and a mentor to trainees and junior faculty at Harvard and Dartmouth. Bob's work has emphasized developing, implementing, and evaluating innovative community programs for people with serious mental disorders. And one of his core projects for the past 17 years has been building the international learning community on IPS-supported employment, which now includes 23 U.S. state and several foreign countries. One of the groups started this learning community and helped it to expand. I am so fascinated in this work, Bob, because first of all, I think that work is one of those highly under-regarded areas of recovery.
Absolutely.
How did you decide that this was going to be your area of interest and why it holds so much promise to you?
Well, really by accident. Yeah, I spent years studying medications and psychotherapy and groups and day programs and so on. And when I was asked to evaluate employment programs, I resisted at first because I thought employment was a peripheral service to the main job that we were doing in community mental health. That was in the late 80s. But since then, as we studied more and more employment programs, I've just really been impressed by the power of employment to help people recover their lives.
Yeah.
Employment provides all of these things that more and more treatment doesn't provide. And I've come to think it's the most effective treatment we have in mental health.
I am so with you in terms of just having a purpose every day, people around you that can support your being in the world, and a sense of accomplishment. I mean, those are the things just off the top of my head. What have you actually researched and you know are the values that come from employment?
Well, people say that, it's having a positive identity, being able to say to your friends and family that, I work at the deli or at the Department of Health or something like that, rather than I'm an unemployed mental patient. So having that identity, having some structure in your day, having the opportunity to interact with lots of people in a regular environment and develop a network of friends outside of the mental health system. It gives people motivation, I think, that they can get better, that they can control their symptoms, that they don't have to use alcohol and drugs, that they don't have to be idle. All of the research studies show that people with mental health problems who are working, improve their self-confidence, their self-esteem, their quality of life. So, and none of the other treatments that we provide in mental health care really do that.
Yeah. How do you support people who have a diagnosable mental health issue with the idea that, first of all, there's a lot of people who might willingly discriminate against someone who has been known to have bipolar disorder or active depression. So how do you begin to have this conversation with employers about the worth of these individuals and why it's so important to include them in the workplace?
Right. Good question. Well, first of all, I've learned over time that the proportion of employers who have that kind of prejudice is very small.
Wow.
And there are an equal or greater number of employers who have somebody in their family with a disability of some kind and are really extremely interested in giving someone a chance who's, been through problems and is now in recovery. But, we try to do a good evaluation of somebody, of what they want to do and, what kind of work they'd be good at and that sort of thing, so that when we go to employers, we can be very positive about the person's potential to do a good job and, being a good person and so on and so on. Of course, half of the clients that we work with don't want to disclose in that kind of way.
Right.
And so when we do targeted job development, we would not be using that person's name or maybe not even thinking about that person specifically, but we would know that what the job is like in a setting, and we could help the person to apply for that job offsite.
I want you to talk a little bit about how you go through the hoops with individual placement and support. Do you have a database of employers that you've worked with in the past, or is it just like you become almost like a talent agent for a talented person who happens to be coping with some sort of mental health issue?
Right. Well, it's a bit a combination of those things, but more towards the latter, because we think about the job development as being tailored to the individual, So if a guy, wants to work with animals, it's important that we know some of the local veterinarians and pet stores and farms, but we would like to be able to, go to those organizations, maybe with the client and see what goes on and talk with the employer and people who are working there. So, we don't go out and develop, 10 jobs at Kroger's because they need lots of people to collect baskets or something.
Right.
It's really all targeted to what the individual's looking for.
Wow, that's fantastic. So give me an example of where you were actually able to really help someone solidify a position that was meaningful for them.
Sure. As I just mentioned about liking to work with animals, we had a young guy who came into our program a couple of years ago. This is a young man with diagnosis of schizophrenia, had never worked in a job, had trouble finishing high school, was quite paranoid, continued to have hallucinations and lots of symptoms, didn't like being around people, but the employment specialist visited him in his home and saw how wonderful he was with his dog and suggested a job working with animals, and this guy thought it was a great idea. And she ended up helping him get a job on the weekends at a veterinary clinic. And he would go in, and nobody else was there, mostly on the weekend, and he would bathe the animals, feed the animals, sometimes change their bandages, walk the animals. And the employment specialist went in a couple of times to make sure that he knew what he was doing, but he was great at the job. Everybody has some talents. And so the people at the vet clinic just loved this guy, and over time they got him working some during the weekdays, and he became friends with the other young people who work there at the clinic. Working really made his life and helped him feel better about himself. He learned to control his hallucinations, sort of put them to the side. So over time, he went from working, 5 hours a day, 2 days on the weekend, to working almost full time.
Oh, I love that. Do you have the ability to research outcomes for this type of employment? And how do you base it both on the person with lived experience and also the experience of the employer?
Well, we have a lot more research on the clients themselves, and there are actually now 27 randomized controlled trials of the model of supported employment that we've helped to refine over the years for people with mental health issues. We get about 60 to 70% of people to succeed in competitive employment.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Which is usually 2 or 3 times as great as whatever is the active comparator or other employment program that we look at. And the people are very satisfied with the amount of work and the type of work and their opportunities in the job. And some of them, are on Social Security income and get a disability payment, so it really works out well for them to be working 20, 25 hours a week.
Right, yeah. How available is this individual placement and support?
Well, we started in 2001 with 3 programs, 1 in each of 3 states. And there are now about 1,000 programs in the U.S.
Oh, it's fantastic
they're
news.
spread all around the U.S. And there are another 20 high-income countries that have adopted our model, and I don't know how many total programs there are, but maybe an equal number in other countries.
And do you see any barriers that you can talk about?
Oh, sure. The biggest barrier is that supported employment doesn't really make a profit for any profit-making industry. And the insurance payments for supported employment are not easy and straightforward. So a mental health center, for example, typically has to get some money from Medicaid and some money from vocational rehabilitation and some money from state mental health funds and maybe some money from, foundations in order to provide their supported employment services, which sounds like it doesn't make any sense because when we get somebody to work, it saves vast amounts of money for the mental health system.
Sure.
But I think the issue is that the people who save the money are not the ones who are paying for the employment services. So we've been hoping for years that the federal agencies will figure out how to collaborate and provide a simple funding stream so that programs can bill for supported employment. But that hasn't happened yet.
Bob, why isn't it included in the American with Disability Act where employers receive a stipend from the federal government if you hire a person with a physical disability? Why isn't it covered under that?
Well, the ADA does cover some things related to employment, and it certainly pushes mental health systems to provide supported employment. The U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division pretty much goes from state to state to state, suing these states to force them to provide evidence-based services like supported employment.
Right.
There are also tax benefits and some other incentives for employers, and that varies wildly across the high-income countries, how that gets implemented. The rules for employers and the workforce rules and the hiring and firing rules and so on differ a lot. And as you probably know, our government is now struggling with the issues related to disability and welfare and whether people should be required to work.
It's always, when people say, should they be required to work, how about how many people willingly would really want to work if there were just jobs that they could get? What are the biggest policy issues that you think we should know about, Bob?
Well, there are definitely jobs out there, especially right now. There are jobs everywhere. And, we know about 2/3 of the people who are on disability for mental health reasons want to work, but only a small portion of them are able to access the help they need through supported employment. And for young people, the proportion is even higher. Over 90% of the young people with an early mental illness, even a severe mental illness, want to work and want employment to be part of their treatment package.
Right.
But figuring out how to align the, insurance benefits and the managed care organizations and the state policies and the Medicaid waivers and all that in order to make this happen has been really difficult.
If we can just give people meaningful work, that it's a big chunk of people's ability to recover. So before I leave you, could you just talk a little bit more about some of the values that you see people able to adopt once they do get meaningful employment?
Well, people who have mental illness want to be regular citizens. And they want to participate in community life, and they want to be self-sufficient, and they want to be independent of the mental health system, and they want to make a contribution. The way our system has been set up for centuries, really, keeping people in long-term hospitals and not providing decent housing and not helping them find jobs, has made all of those things difficult. But, employment is more effective than anything else we do. I don't see anything in our traditional treatments that helps people move into recovery and take charge of their own lives.
Yeah, you said it so well. Anything else you want to add, Bob?
No, but thank you very much for talking with me.
Yeah, it was a wonderful conversation. And if you want to find out more about Bob's work, you can go to the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care or Bob's website. Is it IPS?
IPSworks.com, I think, but it might be .org.
No, it's .org. Yeah, IPSworks.org. And one of the reasons that, especially if there's employers that are listening who might want to actually offer someone a job like this and get connected with Bob's great work, there you can do it. And for those of you that want to become a sustaining member for the Foundation in Excellence in Mental Health Care, just click on the link below.